We're all, I think, very fortunate to be here this afternoon. It's a very special time when the NEAR group gets together for another Hall of Fame. It's a privilege to be among champion race drivers and the sports personalities and our many friends. Of those in this room this afternoon, however, few are as fortunate to attend as Art Rousseau. Now deep in his 70s, much of Art's racing was done in the sport's most dangerous days and nights. His was a time when, at the beginning of the season, drivers looked around at each other, and they sort of wondered how many of them would still be around at the end of the year. He drove big cars and midgets without even a roll bar. Never mind a wing, never mind a roll cage, not even a roll bar. With oversized wire wheels holding primitive narrow tires, he sat bolt upright in those things, and with no fear whatsoever, tossed those cars sideways into the corners of dusty, rutty dirt tracks that were dangerous beyond all reason. If there was fear, it would have been justified, but instead, he displayed extraordinary courage. He can tell you about many races in which he competed where men died. He can tell you about his own collection of injuries, about being upside down at Westboro and Langhorne in cars that had no roll bar. His niece, Deborah Rousseau, who's here today sitting over at the table, called him Uncle Boo Boo. Guess why? Art's brother Vic remembers running to accidents in which Art was involved, fearing the worst and getting there to the overturned car and to hear Art underneath screaming, "Will you get this damn thing off me?" When he broke his leg, Art just drove anyway, stuck the cast outside. You see that number 621 outside? That was his, and with a broken leg, he just stuck the left leg right outside. Track officials said, "You can't do that," so Art cut the cast off and raced anyway. His times were extraordinarily dangerous. One day at Keene, Art qualified Jimmy Goodwin's big car. It was Goodwin's wedding anniversary, so he could be forgiven for having missing qualified. Later in the day, Goodwin arrived, jumped in the car, and in a few laps, he was gone, pierced with a piece of lumber, and that one made a huge impression on Art Rousseau. At the Athol Fairgrounds, coming down for the start, Art took another tumble. When the accident was over, his crew looked at him and they said, "You got to go to the hospital, man. You are hurt." But Art said, "No, there's a race to run, and we're going to run the race first." And run it he did, and win it he did, and then he let the crew take him off to the hospital for a little medical attention. At Keene, after many drivers were hurt by a horse fence rail that ran around the racetrack, under the cover of darkness, Art Rousseau and other big car drivers snuck into the speedway with hammers and wrecking bars and tore that wall down with their bare hands. If courage is the mark of an athlete, Art Rousseau is a great athlete. When stock cars became popular, Art drove them, achieving enormous success at Stafford Springs Speedway on both the half-mile, and did you know there was a little quarter-mile paved track in the infield, and he succeeded with that one too. At Riverside Park, he drove Bob Oliver's number 10 V8 Buick to the head of the point standings. At the Cheshire Fairgrounds in Keene, he won in that cut-down number 621 that's outside, the car that Peter von Snydern has so carefully and lovingly replicated. He won for Pete Galker, the Granite State Auto Body, Bob Oliver, his brother, and so many others. As a driver, Art Rousseau was exceptionally smooth. The cars he drove never jerked or abruptly changed their direction. Smooth is fast. That's the best way to do it, and Art Rousseau was clearly one of the very best. He was a gentleman when rough and tumble times favored tough guys instead. I've never, ever, not once, heard a person say an unkind word about Art Rousseau. Part of his popularity was that he's always been a nice guy, a man for whom a joke is part of every day and a smile is part of every hour. There are so many Art Rousseau stories at Keene when a huge rut ripped the left front wheel and backing plate assembly off his stock car. Art won on 3 wheels. And there was one hell of a fight afterwards, let me tell you, because the guys he beat, well, they thought 4 wheels. You got to have 4 wheels. It's got to be against the rules to win with only 3. And some other people said, well, he can't possibly have had brakes. And we've got a rule that says you've got to have brakes. And they argued and they fought. And what really happened that day was that Art Russo had driven that car so well that on 3 wheels, when he'd get into the corners, he'd just pitch it, pick the left front wheel off the racetrack, and that's how he managed to get through the ruts without tipping it over. I was there that day. I saw it happen. Rainey Charland was there that day. He can tell you about it. Ernie Gahan was there that day. He can tell you about it. Art beat them both. In fact, if you ask Rainey, how courageous are you? If you ask Rainey, he'll tell you how good Art Russo was, and he'll tell you of the bitter rivalry that existed between 2 Frenchmen, each of whom thought that the day's feature belonged to him. In his day, Art Russo was the headliner, star of the show. At Stafford, when they ran advertising for the stock car races, every ad carried the picture of Art's number 621. At Keene, when the promoter wanted to advance an upcoming big car show, he brought in Art's white number 20, and fans saw an incredible performance. Engine roaring, dirt flying off the rear wheels. Art simply danced with that car, hauling it through the corners at flat-out speed. A couple of years ago, the late Vic Girardi asked Art to drive the A.J. Foy Championship car at the Vintage Meet in New Hampshire. If you were there that day, you saw that car driven as beautifully as it could have been by Foyt at his prime in his 30s. It was, however, driven considerably faster than Mr. Girardi had instructed Mr. Russo to drive it. But that's Art, too. Art never knew what a speed limit was. Years earlier, when the big cars had come to Essex Junction, Vermont, Art was driving an underpowered 4-port Riley. The hottest driver of the year at the time was Joey Chitwood. He had all the finest equipment. Art's stuff just wasn't even close to being able to keep up. The race ended that day with Chitwood winning and Art Russo finishing second. And Art's brother Vic told me last week that he'll never forget Joey Chitwood getting out of his car and going over to Art Russo and telling him that he was the best race car driver he'd ever seen. Quite a compliment from the touring champion. As was too often the case with stars from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, nobody kept records of Art's wins and his championships. His brother Harvey wound up with many of the trophies, and at one time there were 68 of them in Harvey's basement. They're all gone now, given away. In Art's day, trophies were only awarded to people who won major events, not for second or third, or not for the regular weekend race. That he collected so much hardware is the best record we have now of what was once one of the most dazzling careers in New England auto racing history. Many of Art's fans, his friends, his relatives have gathered here this afternoon to honor his achievement. It is with great pride that I introduce to you one of the finest gentlemen, one of the very best race drivers New England has ever produced, Art Russo. Come on up. Now, Art's got a little bit of laryngitis, so he asked me if we could just do a brief interview here. What does this mean to you, Art, to win this?
It means the whole world.
Let's say it right in the microphone.
I just would like to say that this has been the most momentous. Oh, I got to talk to you. I just say that it's unbelievable, and I'm so proud and happy, and I think this is the greatest group of people in this sport that I've ever met in my life, and I've enjoyed it immensely. I love you all, and I hope you're all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Great job. Thank
Oh, look at that. They get the 620. Ugly guys, isn't he?
I hope so.
Thank you.